limits, making them produce buds so flavorful and potent that you'll wonder why you ever bothered with anything else. Now, what this is, when you go buy a bag soil, even if you're buying like a Build a Soil 3.0 or maybe even like big roots or something like that, that's like a $30+ bag. Even those, they're not even going to come close to how much. The difference of this is there's so much nutrient in there. It's really tough to imagine. You're almost packing as much in there as you can. And then you're giving all this food to these microorganisms. They're breaking it down over that time. And some of them are going to release slow. Some of them are going to release in the middle. Some of them are going to release at the end of your harvest. But it's all just designed in there to just perfectly just feed your plants all the way through with minimal effort without having to buy any other, chemistry set, any other nutrients, anything like that. So all you need is water. It's known for water only. Unlike most standard potting mixes, super soils remove the need for water-soluble nutrients and instead allow the grower to only regularly provide pH balanced water. So we've simplified this down to a point where all you have to do is my light too close? Is my humidity in the right spot? Is my temperature in the right spot? Do I have enough water or too little water? And so your primary focus is going to be, do I have too much water or too little water? If you talk to my girlfriend, Carissa, I oftentimes don't even let anybody water because I take it so seriously with that. So, I mean, that is really what you want to, be focused on with it. That's all you really need. You don't need to put anything more. It's packed with nutrients. Unlike other traditional potting mixes, super soils come with a higher amount of organic material, like we're talking about, along with other nutrients needed for natural cycles to occur. So basically, we're trying to make a full ecosystem where everything can function just like it does in nature. And so this blend is designed to include all the nutrients necessary to grow your plants through harvest with hydro-like growth and yield in less time. So we'll jump in. I'm just going to go through all these different amendments. What's in the recipe, just so you know. Obviously, when you have this, you don't need to learn anything or do anything. But this is why everything's in here. This is what everything does. So the first one's alfalfa, which is a vegetable. Alfalfa, we call it energizer. It's more than just rabbit food. It's loaded with nitrogen, kickstarting the microbial parties in the soil. So if you ever heard about composting, you need browns and greens. So we're loading it with those greens. This is a ton of nitrogen in here, and that's going to really feed a lot of these microbial populations. It's also rich in this triacontanol, and that's basically a growth hormone. So that's one of the main reasons we like to have alfalfa in there. You get your nitrogen, but you also have these growth hormones in there, and that's just going to help increase the growth of the plants. And the next one we've got is bone meal, the root whisperer. This one's packed with phosphorus. So phosphorus is what you want for fruiting, your flowering, but it's also what you want for root development. So it gets down to the root of things, literally. It's the secret handshake that says, welcome to the roots, let's grow. Plus, it's a calcium hero providing or fortifying plant cell walls against invaders. So calcium is one of those things that you could almost call an NPK. It's almost a macronutrient. You need a ton of it to really, really push the levels of cannabis. Next, we've got neem seed meal. It's mostly nitrogen, just like the alfalfa, but neem seed meal, it really does a double duty. It nourishes your plants and it sends a pest packing. So I put it like having a bouncer at the door, keeping the riffraff out. So basically, the neem seal you can really smell in the mix at first when you're putting it in there, but it really just prevents a lot of different the negative nematodes that we don't want in there. Stay out. A lot of fungus gnats are going to stay out with this neem seed meal. So we put that in there for that reason. And then the high phosphorus guano. This is actually like what I've always called my secret sauce. I've never told anybody this ingredient ever. And this I actually get from Indonesia in the rainforest. And out there, all the fruit flies and all the insects and things like that, they're just feasting on all this amazing fruit out there. And the bats come and eat them, and they just make this guano that I've never tasted in any other guanos. And I've tried Mexican, I've tried the high phosphorus seabird guano, all that stuff. This to me just gives it that like buttery flavor. And the high phosphorus, again, that's going to be your fruiting and your flowering. So this is what's going to be developing a lot of your buds and a lot of that flavor. So I really like this stuff. This is the only stuff you can't get at the grocery stores too. So you can get it from me if you want. I order a lot of it. Otherwise, they're going to try and stock it. Otherwise, you can get it on Amazon. So the high phosphorus, I really like that stuff a lot. Kelp meals and most soil mixes that you're going to find. Kelp meal is an accumulator. So kelp is the seaweed in the ocean, and that's what we call an accumulator. It basically pulls all the nutrients out of the ocean, and that's how it grows. It's just accumulating stuff that comes by, brings a bit of the ocean magic to your soil. It's chock full of micronutrients, growth hormones. So just like that alfalfa with that tricontrol, this is going to have additional auxins and growth hormones in it. So we definitely like the kelp meal. I like to taper it down to kind of a minimum with the kelp meal because, as you'll see in this whole program, we use a lot of different microgreens and we use a lot of alfalfa. And so these things you're using your kelp meal to get all your micronutrients. So it's like your Centrum vitamin, you know, if we were to take that. So the kelp meal is going to give that, but because we use a lot of microgreens, we can cut down on our kelp meal. The problem with a lot of ocean products, whether they be fish meal, kelp meal, anything like that, uh, they tend to have higher metals in there. Just like you don't want to eat a ton of fish because you can start accumulating mercury or metals. You know, later on as we get into more commercial stuff, you know, you don't want to have too high of metals in your soil because that can actually transfer to flour. You know what I mean? And if you are growing commercially, that can be a problem. So I limit that and then I supplement it more with the microgreens. Blood meal. So these are byproducts of, you know, the animal waste industry. And you might hear some companies or organic, you know, companies talking trash on using bone meal or blood meal. But when we're doing regenerative gardening, to me, the whole purpose of doing this and learning regenerative is not only to grow a better product, but it's also to turn, you know, this waste into something useful. We're regenerating soil, we're regenerating waste. So I don't necessarily go and buy McDonald's burgers or anything like that, you know, and I don't necessarily support that personally, but you know, that waste is there and we have to turn it into something useful. You know what I mean? Hopefully, if we stop supporting them, you know, this will dry up and we'll have to, you know, figure something else out. But there's a plethora of it there. And I think it's very important to turn that stuff, even if they're saving money, it's still important to turn that stuff back into the soil because, you know, a big problem with what's going on right now with all these salts is that, you know, it's depleting the soil and these things aren't cycling. Okay. The cool part about nature is that, you know, when it starts cycling all these things and we have enough stuff to cycle it, basically, you know, once one thing grows, it actually perpetuates and it grows exponentially. That's why, you know, the Mayans could, you know, start their own gardens and now we've got a rainforest. You know what I mean? Because then nobody was there to take care of it. But once you start the snowball, you know what I mean? It keeps going. So that's the whole purpose. We want to, you know, return this stuff back into the ground, break it down. Next, we've got our crab crustacean meal. So we call this the defender of nitrogen, phosphorus, and calcium. Crab meal doesn't just feed, it fortifies. Chitin in the meal beefs up plant defenses, making pests think twice. So what's chitin? Chitin is their shells, you know, a lot of the piece of their shells. It's also in a lot of insect shells. And so when you have chitin in your mix, you know, and insects go in there, they kind of see a graveyard of a lot of the shrapnel from a lot of the insect bodies of this chitin. And so that stuff's going to help prevent. And they're like, this doesn't look like a good spot for me to go hang out, so I'm going to bounce, you know, and then we get the other nutrients in there. It does smell pretty bad when you're putting it in, but everything smells good when you're done. Malted barley. So this one is another kind of secret one that I haven't really told anybody about, but it's one of the most important things to really, you know, that it's one of the biggest groundbreaking things that, you know, that we've come across in our soil gardening. So a big thing that, you know, people like me are trying to do and what we're trying to do teaching this is we're trying to share this and we're all trying to the later learn this and work together and run our own programs and work together and make better mixes and make them more competitive. Once we make them more competitive and increase the performance of them, we can outcompete a lot of the synthetic salt nutrients and they're just gonna be gone. There's no point. You know what I mean? So this is one of the things that really took us forward in that a lot. Malted barley, because it has 8 different enzymes in it that contribute to 22 different synthases in the soil. So basically, when we when we're adding the bone meal or blood meal or alfalfa or any of these things, basically these are just raw, dried things that exist. Plants fall, animals fall, everything that just happens to fall in nature. We're just replicating nature. And so, when you have malted barley, when these things break down, there's certain, an insect might eat it, or, it might break down a little bit, and then, it needs a carbon atom. It needs something else to basically continue to the next step of breakdown. And so there's many steps in that breakdown synthesis, but the 8 enzymes in malted barley contribute to 22 of those synthase. So basically, when it breaks down to one stage, it has what it needs to break down to the next stage, and then it breaks down to another stage, and then it has another enzyme to break down. So basically what that does is it speeds everything up. So we're speeding up the breakdown, and what happens is we're actually cutting, 15 to 20% off of our flowering time. A lot of my hydrogrower friends get really demoralized when I tell them that we're hitting 27, 28% hemp in 8 weeks flat. So you can really cut that down. Most flowering cycles are going to be 9 weeks, sometimes longer, but we're really getting it down into that 7.5 to 8.5 week time period when you're really maximizing everything. And a big part of that's that malted barley. Gypsum, so this has been around for a while. Structure sage, it's improved soil structure while delivering calcium and sulfur, all without messing with your pH. It's the peacekeeper of the soil amendment. So it's got a pH close to the 7, which is what we want. We're right in the high 6s. And this is going to have a ton of calcium. Like I said, we need a lot of calcium. This is going to give that. It also has sulfur, and I like to have, a good amount of sulfur in there, because what's cool about organic gardening is that these choices of which ingredients you're putting in there can definitely contribute to the flavor coming out of your flower. And so the sulfur is really going to increase the gas in your flower a lot. And I know that a lot because a lot of hemp doesn't have gas. So you got to really bring that out. So the sulfur is going to help with that. Gypsum is going to have that in addition to the calcium. Basalt is rock dust, basically. So it's basalt dust is a slow releasing micronutrient powerhouse, ensuring your plants have a steady stream of mineral goodness. So these are basically like rocks, it's basalt rock. And so the soil that we're making right here, what's cool about it is that it's meant to last a long time. We're not just putting a bunch of cheap perlite in there that's breaking down, or these things aren't just a quick fix that are just going to run out and you're like, oh, this is great now, and then it's and then you need to buy new soil from them. So this soil, if you take care of it, it's going to last a decade. You know what I mean? And basalt's going to be in there feeding it for that whole time. So I mean, these are expensive inputs on here, and that's why it's cool to make your own stuff, because you can put a lot of good inputs in there that you wouldn't be able to buy. Glacial rock dust is another similar one to the basalt. This is mine from ancient glacial deposits. The dust is a smorgasbord of minerals, offering taste of primeval earth to your garden. So why wouldn't we just use one or the other? One thing I truly believe in is diversity. And so you already have a lot of these microorganisms just present on these materials, just in nature. So, you grab this big buffet for your soil. You give them everything that they need, and the plants, in organics, they might have way more nitrogen than they need in nature, in the soil. They're gonna pick and choose that stuff. And so we want this big buffet, we want diversity, and we want the plant to be able to choose for itself and just provide. The rock phosphate, so this is one of the things in the original subcool mix. Rock phosphate's the long game, releasing phosphorus slowly but surely, ensuring a sustained feed for root and flower development. So if you remember, we had some of that bone meal. We've got a rock phosphate, and we had some of that guano. So these are going to be those primary kind of phosphorus, root development, fruiting. But some of them release a little bit slower. Some of them release, kind of in the middle, and some, take a little bit longer. So we definitely want that phosphorus pumping through all the way through our harvest. Epsom salts, the magicians. Magnesium and sulfur in a pinch. Epsom salts are the quick fix for brighter greens and happier blooms. Now, if you do notice that you've got a magnesium deficiency, you can add a couple sprinkles into your water and just water it in too. But we put a little bit of Epsom salts in our mix, just a touch. And then we've got our garden lime. So this is just normal garden lime. You can use dolomite lime. It sweetens the soil, nudging pH towards neutral, ensuring nutrients are always in the green zone for uptake. And oyster shell flour. So the calcium king, slow release calcium from oyster shells not only strengthens cell walls, but gently corrects soil acidity over time. So this is gonna be the bulk of where we get most of our calcium. It's cheap, it's available, and it works great. So these are going to be the bulk of our calcium. That's all the ingredients right there. So a lot of stuff in there. You can do a simpler format. If you want to look up Subcool's mix and you just don't want to get this much into it, you can do a simpler mix. This one's just more advanced. It's just something that I've just evolved over that time period. Like I said, to speed up flowering for different reasons. You know what I mean? Maybe drop metals to different stuff. We found that this is just going to give you the highest quality mix in my experience. So we're going to take all these and we're going to do what's called a thermophilic composting. So that just means a hot compost, thermos, your temperature. So by mixing these all together, they're already in the right ratio. And so we're going to take all these and we're going to mix them with big bales of peat moss. And so peat moss, some people use coconut coir. You could totally use that as well and replace that with your peat moss. But we'll take our peat moss. That's from bogs in Canada. And just so you guys know, every brand of Canadian peat moss all comes from the same bog. So don't worry if it's from Lowe's or Home Depot or some fancy bag at the grocery store that's twice as much. It's literally that's all coming from the same spot. So don't worry about that. And then we like to use rice hulls for our aeration. So we're basically using peat moss as our base. We're using rice hulls as our aeration. So that's basically going to just like break everything up, create air pockets, and create that oxygen in there. And so we're going to combine all this, combine all the minerals, and this is going to be the first step towards creating everything. So the main thing, we're obviously just going to mix all these ingredients up, make sure that they're mixed up well. And then the key is going to be the moisture. So this is going to be the number one thing that is going to determine your success with this, is having too much or too little moisture, just like growing. So it's no different than growing, and so what you want to do is, when we've mixed this up, and we're going to do this after, we're going to mix this all up, we're going to wet it down. And what I like to do is just wet it a little bit, let it chill, wet it a little bit more, wet a little bit more, you know what I mean? And just go little by little. You can always add a little bit more to it. But basically what you're going for, you don't need a meter or anything, but when you've wet it down, you want to squeeze it in your hand. And if you can squeeze out more than a drop, it probably has too much, moisture in there. So we just let it sit out in the open and kind of let it air dry a touch. And then if you're not getting any moisture and then you open back up your hand and it's not clumping together, then it's too dry. We want it to just squeeze it, let go, and you can just let it sit in a clump on your hand. And that's going to be about the right moisture level. I would err on the side of less moisture, than more though, personally. And the heat is on. So once we've mixed everything together, once we've added our moisture in there, we're basically going to cover that with our tarp, and then we're going to let the pile heat up. It's naturally going to heat up, and this might sound like magic to you guys right now, but basically what's happening is that there's already all these microorganisms in all this stuff, and basically when we put that together and we give them a bunch of food, they're going to double they're going to be like, oh, there's all this food. We're going to just procreate, and they're going to double in population every 20 minutes. That's how fast they are. Their lifespan's 7 minutes, okay, on average. So they're going to keep doubling in population, and they're going to keep growing within your pile. And there's going to be so much life that you can't see that it's literally going to heat up from all the kinetic movement going on. And that, with the insulation that is naturally provided by the soil, it's going to actually heat up to 130 to 158. So you do want to get like a little thermometer and just check your pile. Typically it's going to sit for 2 to 3 days after we mix it. You could let it sit for a week and be lazy, or just let it sit for a month and not do anything. You know what I mean? If you want something really quick, I'm always pumping stuff out as fast as I can. So the fastest way to do it is going to be to let it sit for 2 or 3 days, then dump it back out. and then reload it back in. And we're going to try and take that hot inside, bring that to the outside, and bring the cold into the middle for the second time. And so aeration and adjustment. So after reaching that peak temperature after that 2 or 3 days, like I said, we're going to just dump that out. We're going to introduce more oxygen into the mix and evenly distribute the heat and adjust the moisture as needed. So again, check your moisture, do the little hand trick, see if you need more moisture or less. We're going to load it back up. But everything, all the microorganisms that we're trying to cultivate right now are what's called aerobic bacteria. So basically, they all feed on oxygen like us. And so that's why I said air on the light side, because if you have too much moisture in there, you're going to start getting a sewage smell. Okay. And so if you get a sewage smell, what that means is that there's not enough oxygen. And now the microorganisms that don't breathe oxygen are going to start taking over. You know what I mean? And that doesn't mean that it's bad. All it means is that, you might have to just let it, like I said, let it air out a little bit. And then basically you're going to just like tilt all the scales towards the aerobic and they're going to start winning the battle again, and they're going to start procreating. So, you're not ruining any batches. You just need to like let it air out, let those aerobic microorganisms start winning the battle and taking over. And cool down and cure. So once the pile cools, let it cure. This period allows compost to stabilize, ensuring it's ready to nourish your plants without burning them. So obviously we don't want to like start giving the soil to the plants when, the soil is 110 degrees, or something like that. So we just want to let it cool down. If you do want to try and like accelerate that, you can add a little bit more, cold water, if you're add any moisture to it, or, just open it up and air it out a little bit. And then the final touch before using, considering adding worm castings, the malted barley, and the mycorrhizae fungi. This trio introduces beneficial microbes and fungi, transforming your super soil into a living, breathing entity ready to take your plants to the next level. You can mix it before. You can mix your barley in there before. You can mix your castings in there before. I like to do it after it starts cooling down because there are some microorganisms in there that can get kind of killed off. So there's two benefits to that hot composting that we're doing. First, it's actually going to sterilize the soil. That's why we always do want it above that 131 degrees for at least 3 days. That's why we're taking that outside cold compost, putting that in the middle, because now the stuff that is colder on the outside, we want to get that to 130 degrees or higher. And so that's going to kill off, if you're doing outdoor compost, that's going to kill off any weed seeds in there getting to that temperature. It's going to kill off a lot of bacteria. Just like if you were to get a fever, your body's going to raise temp to just kill that off. Or if you cooked food, it's got to get to a certain temp so that you can kill off all the bad stuff. So that's exactly what we're doing. And then as it cools down, I like to add the barley. Mycorrhizae fungi, can get damaged in the high heat. So these things I just add just to make sure. They will be present in there regardless, so don't worry if you're going to mix it ahead of time. I just do that just because, I'm timing it and putting them in there right when they should be, right when they like that temperature. So practical application, unleashing the super soil power. So deploying the super soil, now that you've conjured up this magical medium, it's time to let it loose. Whether you're filling pots, amending garden beds, or giving your established plants a nutrient boost, super soil is your secret weapon. Spread it, mix it, or layer it. Just get it to your plants and watch the magic happen. So this is kind of a one-all thing. Like you literally just put this soil in your pot. You put plants in it. You can put little baby plants this big. They'll grow perfect. You can put my 6-foot tall, monsters in there that are 4 feet wide. Same thing. It doesn't matter. You can have the microgreens in there. You can have, any of that stuff's going to grow. All of it's necessary. And you might be asking yourself, how can the same soil feed something super huge and something feed this tiny little baby and not get burned? And basically, it's because of all this cycling. It's because of what nature's already created for us. So basically, when you grow with synthetic salts, you're basically just dissolving these salts in, and it's kind of like IV, and like if they'd IV all your food, through your vein. That's kind of like your own synthetic salts. So with this, we're basically going through the digestive system. You know, we're you know, we're on a slower breakdown. And so what happens in nature, and this is documented now in science, but basically the plant basically will take the sugars that it creates from the sunlight and, and it'll actually kick out sugars into the roots. And what that's going to do is and they can kick out different sugars, and that's going to basically kick out these sugars, and it's like calling the dinner bell, and all these microorganisms start creeping in, and then they basically will uptake all these microorganisms into the root, and they'll actually destroy a lot of them and kick some of them out and start cultivating them and keep some sugar around to keep them populating. And they'll actually just naturally attract the nutrients through these mice. So the microorganisms actually eat the material. The fungi, the mycorrhizal fungi, eat the material, the organic material, and then basically that's in their belly, and then the plant will call them all over, like, come on over, and then it'll basically extract all those nutrients from those microorganisms. Then it'll save some of them, so it's not using all of them, and then it'll release them back out, kick them some more sugar, let them go to work, bring them back in. So it just keeps cycling and cycling and cycling. And so the plant basically, works with it. And so that's why we can just use the same thing for everything. And so top dressing for victory. So after you have this is a really heavily amended mix, but when you're growing really high feeding cannabis plants, that's the main reason why they do use salts. So 95% of all indoor cannabis is grown with salts. And the reason is because it's just so demanding, so feeding. It's really tough to use organic gardening and actually produce enough soluble, nutrients that are just ready for that plant. So how do we do it? We need to have more of those microorganisms that it can take in. So basically the life is the key to it. We're just creating this huge, flourish of life. And so when you're feeding the plants with this soil, all you need to do is just save a little bit of extra soil, and you're just going to top, an extra inch or two on top of your pot, and then you're just going to water that in. We like to use our microgreens, and we top microgreens, as you can kind of see in here. And so we do that to help provide vitamins and minerals for the community, and we infuse those into our creams. But I think it's a great thing to contribute for your family and your kids. And it's tough to get vitamins and minerals these days, which is why we do this. But this way you can actually do it right at your house, and it's going to be a twofold benefit, because not only are you going to benefit from the microgreens growing on your soil, but if you may not know this, but vegetables actually lose 50% of their nutrition after 3 days of being harvested, and none of the veggies are here within 3 days. So when you pluck these and cut them that day, like and they grow in the super soil, the radish tastes like wasabi. Like it's just, everything is so amplified. It's incredible. But it's a great way to save money and just provide for these extra benefits for your family. But then additionally, you're going to harvest these microgreens in 6 to 12 days. And then basically all the scraps that are left after you harvest and feed your family, we're going to top another inch or 2 inches of super soil on top. We're going to bury all those scraps of it, and we're going to turn it into a living mulch. And so this is exactly like if you go into a forest and you see all the little cover crops growing beneath the trees, and some of them live, some of them die, but these actually get composted, and these microorganisms just break down and mulch this and compost it naturally. And so that's basically what we're doing. And like I said earlier, a lot of these microgreens, there's an additional benefit of not having to use as much kelp meal, not having as much metals in there. And so, and then last is that, I'm kind of stony, if you might guess, but you don't have to keep a calendar to try and do any of this. So what I love about this whole method is that, you're going to harvest your microgreens. You're going to be like, okay, these look ready. They just look ready. And then, you'll chop those down. You'll be staring at a bunch of scraps on there. It's going to be very natural to just cover that up with some more microgreens and grow some more. So, I mean, you're basically just topping with that extra soil every week or 2 weeks. And, the microgreens are going to help feed that soil with the extra nutrients, but they're also going to act like a little rainforest cover for your soil. And so basically, that's going to reduce water. So if you see all these plants right here, you know, just like if you were walking into the forest, okay, right when you walk into the forest, what do you notice? You said it smells great. You know, is that it's a lot more humid, right? It's a lot more humid under there because all the evaporation is getting trapped underneath all those leaves. And so if you didn't have those, all the moisture on your soil is just going to evaporate straight up into the air. And so by having these cover crops right in here, you know, that's going to kind of trap that. And that's going to actually keep that soil moist on top. And what that's going to do is bring up all the microorganisms that are alive in that soil that we want. We're going to bring them to the top, and we're going to save and use less water. So that's this living mulch. I guess I get ahead of myself. Mixing fresh microgreen seeds with your top dressings, like putting your soil on steroids. These tiny powerhouses grow quickly, adding organic matter and attracting beneficial insects. After harvest, what's left becomes a living mulch, continuously feeding your soil and plants. This cycle not only enriches your garden, but simplifies your feeding schedule. No calendar reminders needed. So I really like this. I really recommend it. We are going to get our seed license, and we'll start supplying everybody with our mix of seeds too, if you guys want. Water wisdom. When you introduce this nutrient-dense soil to your garden, remember water is now your ally in a new way. Water with dechlorinated pH-balanced water. That's the most important thing. First time I started growing, I was living in Egan, and water is horrible. It's 550 ppm. It killed all my plants. You know, just using tap water. So I like to use the small boy filter, just a dechlorination filter and a sediment filter. You can get house ones. You can get some at the grocery stores. They're called small boys or tall boys. Those both work really, really well. And that's all you need. The environmental impact, a green revolution. So not only is it nice that we get to grow some of the best cannabis with our amazing soil, but by adopting this super soil approach, you're doing more than just growing plants. You're leading a charge towards a more sustainable and regenerative future. This method recycles waste, promotes soil health, supports biodiversity, and contributes to carbon sequestration. It's a win-win-win for your garden, the environment, biodiversity, and the planet. And so back to the salts. If you are growing hydroponically or growing in salts, there's always runoff water. It contaminates all the water, you know, and then we got to clean all that stuff up. With this, it actually naturally filters all the water. And there's actually humic acids in the worm castings that we have that'll actually help negate even chlorine. You know what I mean? You could actually take some of our worm castings and put it in the chlorinated water if you're really in a pinch, and you could actually use that water if you just dissolve some of that worm castings in there, because the humic acids basically tie it up. The grower's journey, conclusion and call to arms. Creating super soil through thermophilic composting isn't just gardening. It's an act of rebellion against the unsustainable status quo. It's a commitment to nurturing not only your plants, but the very earth that sustains us all. As we wrap up this masterclass in soil alchemy, remember that every scoop of super soil you spread is a vote for a healthier, greener world. Together, we can turn this world into a flourishing garden, one super soil mix at a time. And I really believe in this stuff, and I do think it creates the best product. And if you know our company, you know that, you know, a lot of it's based on solventless, and these guys are realizing as the solventless market's taken off that, you know, you can't just buy material and make solventless. You have to have quality material go in. None of these top brands that are really pumping out the high quality hash you're seeing on Instagram, it's down to the quality of material going into there. You really have to. And you know, people used to talk about like how much more the weed used to smell, and you know, so if you want it to smell like that, you got to grow like they used to grow back then. You know what I mean? You have to grow that way. We've all gone to the salts, and I'm telling you, this, I really truly believe that's the path forward. You know, and I think that you know, a big reason why I wanted to share this with everybody is because I believe in it so much. But you know, I also, you know, and like I told Steven and Tanner, but you know, it's a big thing for me to you know, I've had people try and steal this recipe from me. I've had business partners try and, you know, screw me out of it. I've had a lot of things happen, you know, so it's a big thing for me to give this away after I've been working on it for so long. But you know, it's really important for me to, you know, to push this organic method. I really think it's the way. I think that everybody should have access to the kind of cannabis that I have access to, and it shouldn't be just 1% of people and the rest of everybody gets this chemical romance and, everybody's feeling sick and, so I mean, this is the only way that I found that you can really know what's in your product at the end. And I'll tell you, it's just super clean, it's super natural. And I think that the way that, I have an engineering background and, one thing about engineering and race engineering is it's very complex and things affect each other. And so it's very similar to gardening in that respect. And that's where it can get really frustrating for people. And there's so many different ways to do it that there isn't a wrong way. Like I could swap out the high phosphorus guano, use some seabird guano, or I could use, a lot of other things. But it chose those for specific reasons or because the flavor that it added or, or some other benefit, but it takes a long time of me just taking one because of that complexity. It's really hard to change more than one or two things at a time in that whole 9-week cycle. You know what I mean? So it's really slow process, to do that. And, so a bunch of us organic nerds like me, we all, nerd out, do our little experiments, and then we, come back together and we talk and, we work through this stuff and, it's come a really long way. And this is about really pushing that forward. And so I want to really instill you guys, and inspire you guys to do the same thing, and I try and emphasize to try and do one change at a time or two changes, but you might have some material that's just at your disposal, you know what I mean? Or you have some sort of waste product that's around you, or you're wondering, or you grow a certain thing that, that's in your garden, but, by you experimenting with that stuff and us kind of reconnecting in the future, I really believe that we can really further this even more, increase that performance of it, and really build that craft market here in Minnesota. And so, I invite you guys to really do that and share with each other and, make it better. So that's the reason why I want to share this stuff with you. So with that being said, why don't we do some question and answer and then we'll mix up some soil together.
Hey, can we give this man a flower?
Thank you guys. Yeah, appreciate you guys. A lot of info, right? Go ahead.
Could you dive into the worm castings for a second?
Absolutely. Yeah, good question.
Those at the after you.
Yeah, so the worm castings you don't want to leave out. You can add them at the beginning of your mix. They'll work great. I just prefer to add them if you can add them at the end. You know what I mean? Just because there's different microorganisms, and as that temperature comes down, you know what I mean? That's where they're going to thrive. So I like to add those. You can buy just about any worm castings. You can use 5% of your total mix. You can use up to 20%, but don't ever leave out the worm castings because it's one of the most important things. If you guys aren't familiar with worms, they're recyclers. So just like these microorganisms, they're going to recycle a lot of these organic materials and turn them and break them down. And so their bellies have 19 of the 20 effective microorganisms that we need to break down materials. And so that's most of everything. So these worms are some of the best gardeners around. So, you definitely want to utilize them. My worm castings, I pretty much got rid of all my other insect pest management. I just use worm castings for all my insect pest management. And I'll basically just harvest some worm castings and I'll use like a mesh bag, like a 200 mesh bag, and I'll just spray the water right through it and just kind of wear down a lot and wash off a lot of those microorganisms. And then I'll put that with just a light filtration, and then I'll actually foliar spray all my plants with that. And it's kind of like I always think of it as like Survivor, like Naked Afraid. Like when are they always tapping out? It's always like these bugs, just get them, like they just can't here. They'll be on the beach and they're just like these bugs, they just can't. And that's exactly what we're doing with this worm juice. So we're basically taking all these like really tiny, tiny, annoying bugs that are smaller than these aphids or stuff like that. We're just coating them, and they just bounce like that day. They'll be out of there, So So I've been just using that. The worm castings, yeah, definitely do that. You know, as much worm castings you can get in there. I do recommend putting worms in your bins. Um, you know, I used to grow in 10 gallons. We switched to these 30 gallons, and I don't think I'll ever go back. So, I mean, the bigger the pot, the better it's going to be. 30 gallons is really about the minimum that you want to be able to sustain a full ecosystem of life and do a no-till type setup. So, if you're doing small than 30 gallons, you know, there's just, you know, you're going to want to break down your soil, separate the roots, put that in a pile, re-amend it, make more soil, you know, put the same mix into your old soil, re-amend it, recook it, you know, then put it back in. But with the 30 gallons, you can basically just cut out your main root ball, pull that out of there, drop another new plant in there, you know, and then you can basically just add some of these amendments, you know, to your worm castings, you know, and just top with it, or maybe add a, you know, spruce up your soil a little bit, you know, on top with that. So,
Recommendation for proportions of worm castings at?
so I like to use 1 to 1.5 cubic feet per cubic yard that we're gonna mix up. So, so for 1 cubic yard, you know, we'll say 1 to 2 cubic feet. You know, which is like 7 to 15 gallons worm castings. You know, which is like a bag or two. Um, if if you guys do end up getting soil that's pre-made from us, we have a worm farm, and we thermophile excuse me, we thermophilic compost our soil, and then once it comes down to temperature below 90, then I'll actually take a portion of my super soil and I'll actually feed that to my worms, and then we'll add some more guano, some more oyster shell, you know, some more minerals and things like that, you know, and then I grow some wheatgrass, we'll feed them that stuff. And then basically, you know, they'll run through and they're actually feeding on the super soil itself. And so the thought process on that, it's already the perfect kind of balance of nutrients in there. So we're just feeding them that. And so the castings that, you know, that we make are pretty tough to beat, but you can use just about any of them, you know what I mean, and really, you know, and really crank up. But they really increase your terpenes. They really help with pest and you know, insect suppression, and you know, they'll do just about everything for you. So yeah, don't mess the worm castings. Yeah, they're awesome. So yeah, we're blowing up. I'm breeding out. I got some breeders bins, so we're really blowing up our worm bins right now, trying to crank them up, and you know.
Biggest thing you're doing this year.
Well, the biggest thing is that we're mixing this from scratch. I used to buy, you know, bag soils, and I started doing this from scratch, and the results are a lot higher. You know, and I've noticed that, you know, and it made me realize that like all these, you know, mixes that I used to like really appreciate, you know, I'm realizing they're pretty watered down. You know what I mean? And like everybody needs to make a profit, I guess, but you know, they're pretty watered down, and so um, you know, and so I figured if we were, you know, if we're going to be pushing this organic movement and we're going to be, you know, selling everybody on this idea of regenerative agriculture and these organics, I mean, even if everybody was on board with it, we don't have the infrastructure for it. So, you know, that's why I decided, you know, we should just start teaching this, and I'm going to try and build this up to try and supply a lot of this stuff, you know, so that we can, because once we get to a certain scale with this, like it's just going to be cheaper than anybody could ever buy it at a store. You know what I mean? Because I'll just be getting super sacks of everything, and we'll crank it out. So, but, uh, but yeah, it's pretty cool because it's all tested. You know, we've been running for about 3 years. But yeah, the biggest thing is just increasing my worm farm. Yeah, the worm castings probably been one of the biggest things. I mean, the worm castings are unbelievable. You know, and using those for our foliar, you know, it's been huge. I bought like $500 worth of Lost Coast plant therapy, you know what I mean? And which is like what I was using for insect pest management. And like while we were waiting for that, I was like in a pinch, and bugs pressure was getting out of control. So I started spraying with the worm castings, and it was like I like my $500, you know, jerry cans of Lost Coast showed up, and I've never used them, you know, because they're just like, yeah, they're just I don't know, all the bugs bounced after I started spraying the worm castings, and the terpene production's really increased. So all that stuff. Uh, is pretty cool. Yeah,
It's all the way through. Start to harvest.
yeah.
Are you testing all your plants?
Flushing them?
Yeah, all you
No,
just don't have to flush them all.
you don't have to. You don't have to do anything. So this is, yeah, this is gonna be tough to wrap your mind around, but like, you don't have to do anything. Like, you don't have to. Yeah, this is basically gonna turn your cannabis cup winning plants into like house plants. That's how easy they're gonna be to take care of. Yeah, so I mean, you do all your work up front, and what it is like, you know, I've been mixing these soils for a dozen years, but it's like, you know, I can mix my batch of soil. I can grow them out. I can grow different genetics. You know, I make changes to that. You know what I mean? If I notice deficiencies in the plant, you know, I'll make changes to my mix. You know what I mean? And change that from the start. You know what I mean? And after just doing it over and over and over, and then for a decade, and then going commercial, and then just doing it even more, you know what I mean? So now, you know, it's just over time, you know, consistency over all the plant. You know, we have a lot of plants. That's like you want everything identical. You want a consistent mix, you know, and sometimes when you're buying soil, it's not consistent. You know what I mean? And so you'll see when we mix this, like I get really you know, I get really detailed with the mixing of it. You know, and that's the most important part. And so, but yeah, it's all built in there. You know, if you're a plant's out in nature, you don't have to feed it. You know what I mean? All the plant, most of the nutrition is actually already there, but we need this life. You know what I mean? We need this life. The life is what is missing. You know what I mean from this. So, you know, you can take this super soil and you can actually run, you know, water through it and you can bubble it just like a compost tea. You know what I mean? And you can spread that life over a whole acre if you want, you know, and that stuff, or your whole lawn, you know, and that's going to basically increase that life, you know, in there. And that's just going to perpetually just keep getting better and better and better, and the soils keep getting better and better and better. And that's another reason why those bigger pots or the big beds are really nice, because, you know, after a while you don't really need to add a whole lot. Like the cycling, this natural cycling we're talking about, you know, that happens in nature just starts happening. You know, and when you got microgreens, you know, you might add some microgreen seeds or something, you know, you're feeding that organic matter in there. And, you know, you get the benefit of veggies in this case, but also it's just less stuff you're buying, you know, like you can waste all the money in the world. You know, we're gonna mess with build the soil on there, like, you know, 18 square matrix of like, you know, and this happens to every nutrient company, you know what I mean? Like, you know, you start out good, but it's like, you know, we need to add this and add that. And actually one of my employees, he's bought every build soil product you can have, and he put it all in there. And I asked him how his plants were still alive after all that. But they, and they have good products. Don't get me wrong. I'm just talking smack, but you know, you just need water. Like if you have all of it built in there, like, you know what I mean? Like, you know, you can grow cannabis cup winning stuff with, you know, 6 ingredients that Subcool started with. You know, tons of those mixes have 1 cannabis cups. You know what I mean? So it's not necessarily that, you know, you need more. So don't be afraid of having, you know, something with less, or, you know, playing around, or, you know, feeling a certain way. But I really do recommend, you know, growing it this way, doing it the right way, you know, this way as a baseline, because you're going to know what the plant's properly going to grow like, you know what I mean? Like it's, you know, it's good to see how it grows the right way, especially as you're first starting, because like that's your whole barometer, you know, and if you have nothing to relate that to, like you don't even know what, you know, good growth is necessarily at that time. Like to put your final plants in. Yeah, so we're gonna do it for one yard, and then yep, and then we'll email you guys like a quick list recipe too, so you don't have to, you know, we'll just put it on a cheat sheet. And then at Eco Garden Supply 2 over in Minneapolis, there, if you go ask for the Cornell stuff, like they know what's going on. You know what I mean? Yeah, yeah, or same. Sorry, it's right. Yeah, I guess it's right on the border there. Yeah, yeah, same. Yeah, the Midway one. But yeah, those guys, if you tell them, they'll have, you know, they'll help you out and get you set up with that stuff too. But yeah, great question. Sorry for the clarification. But yeah, we're gonna put out a little quick sheet for you so that you know what I mean. You can just carry that and like go with you wherever you want. Yeah.
So you referenced Subcool. Have you developed a personal relationship with them?
No, he actually passed away.
Oh,
But no, I haven't. But he basically, you know, when I started growing, you know, there wasn't a whole lot. You know, there was like Jorge Cervantes, and there was like, you know, there was just like a few guys, you know, doing videos or whatever. You know, there wasn't a whole lot of information, and everybody was keeping it really tight to their chest. And you know, Subcool was this world-renowned breeder, and he was also an editor for the High Times magazine. And if you ever read High Times, that was most of his plants that graced a lot of the pictures on there. But um, you know, he was one of the few people that was really sharing this information. He'd had 30, 40 years growing, and he'd really taken, you know, this original mix and, you know, and really refined it just through trial and error, you know, just like we're talking. And then, you know, he spent a lot of times, you know, talking with people on the forums. There wasn't any websites before. It was like you just had forums, you just had bro science. And, you know, it's really difficult to whittle through all that because everybody who's grown twice in their life, you know, wants to tell you exactly what to do with growing, you know what I mean, and put their input in it. And so it's really difficult to sift through all that. So, you know, Subco really was giving that stuff away. He wasn't trying to profit off of it. And he actually developed this mix to help the medicinal patients so that they could basically, you know, get some help or mix this one time or get some help mixing it one time. And then they could just take care of their plants and water and make their own medicine, you know, and not have to do anything with it, you know, and that was the whole purpose of it. So anybody talking trash on that is probably trying to make some money. Promise you.
is there anything
Yeah.
that you could teach him at this point?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of stuff that just wasn't available over there, and you know that, you know what I mean, helped me get to this stage over here, and so that's you know main reason why I'm giving it away because I want to basically you know leapfrog everybody to where I'm at right now. You know what I mean? And now we're at a level playing field and we just leaped everybody up. You know what I mean? And now we can basically all, you know what I mean, kind of, you know, take our program from there, take our growing from there, you know, do our little things. But if you're going to experiment, like I said, I recommend running this once, see how it goes. Then you can just make a change or whatever if you want. You know what I mean? But you really just need to add more soil on top. A lot of people, you'll see a deficiency you know, in your plants. And it's like, okay, you know, is this magnesium? Is this potassium? Like, what's this deficiency? And you'll be looking it up. You know what I mean? And I get this from a lot of my like, you know, workers, you know what I mean? And it's like, oh, we need to do it, you know, and it's like, is it this? Is it that? You know, and it's like, dude, they're hungry. Like they need food. Like, you know, they don't just need like, they're not just telling you like, I just need this magnesium. Like, if you just give me some sugar, like I know all the kids want sugar and stuff, but you know, like you need food. So we're gonna just throw an inch or two of the super soil on there. You know what I mean? Just because there's one little deficiency and you might know what that is, chances are there's gonna be other deficiencies right behind it. You know what I mean? So, you know, I really have found the best luck just adding more super soil on there. You know what I mean? And doing that. And then, you know, you might have genetic variances between each plant. Like you know, I run 10 different you know, or 10 different strains right now. So you will get some with like a potassium deficiency on there, and some of them don't have any. You know what I mean? But the mix over time, you know, is just going to be the happy medium between all the plants, pretty much. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Where do you get like the biology? It's like comes from like roots or
It comes from the worms. But the thing that's really interesting is it's already there, believe it or not. You know, if you want to make your own lab, you know, like KNF, you know, Korean natural farming, you know, you wash rice with it. You wash, you know, it's just the rice wash. You wash rice, the water, the lab's already on the rice. You know what I mean? That's the other reason why I was talking about the biodiversity because, you know, certain things, you know, the lab might be predisposed to be on rice. You know, there might be other microorganisms that are predisposed to just love alfalfa. You know what I mean? And other ones that might be, you know what I mean, just native to the crab. You know what I mean? Or be more oceanic. You know, so these are all different things. And, you know, I don't claim to know everything about it. I definitely don't. But one thing I do know is that the more diversity in there, basically you're creating more competition. You know what I mean? And when you have more competition, only the strong are going to survive. And so just like in Korean natural farming, your IMOs, you know what I mean? Basically what we're doing is we're going to like these old growth forests where, these huge trees are knocking down, there's tons of life, just, you go to the richest life you can find, you know what I mean? And you go there and where that tree fell and there's just like all these mushrooms growing and different stuff going on and new life, you're going to put your rice over there and you're going to attract those indigenous microorganisms because, they're the alphas. They're the ones that are dominant and they're going to be right there at that prime location taking all the food. You know what I mean? And those are the ones that we want. You know what I mean? Because they've already been pre-selected through nature. You know what I mean? So some things we're selecting to try and find those alphas, but with that biodiversity, you know what I mean? We're letting them win. We're letting them fight it out. And like, it's pretty cool actually. You can look at the soil. If you stare at it with like a close eye, you can see these battles going on. Like, it's crazy. It really is cool. Anyone else?
Soil stuff. If you want to go eat that, because I'm using soil now, that's not a smell I would want in my living room. So is this make like what is making that smell or not be there if you're constantly talking? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. What kind of, I mean, I guess I'm not, I could guess what smells you're talking about, but, this like ours. Yeah. And so when we mix this right now, there might be some offensive smells, but as it breaks down, like if you smell the fresh soil, like I brought some cooked soil that's all done, it smells like a forest. It just smells like a forest. And so when you're walking into a forest and you get that smell, you know what that is? That's actually the microorganisms breathing. And so that's all that life. These microorganisms breathe oxygen, they release CO2 in there. You know what I mean? And if you're doing that IMO stuff, you're looking for that really fertile spot, you're going to smell all that rich, life. You know what I mean? And that's actually the microorganisms. And that's how you know actually that the microorganisms are there. And so when you get done cooking the soil, that's all you smell. You know what I mean? It's just this foresty smell of just all that fresh microorganisms in there. So it smells really good. Usually if it doesn't smell good, it's because you've got too much water in your soil. And then those anaerobic bacteria. Yeah, this stuff will blow you away. Yeah, there's not really. Yeah.
Does it have a yellow label on it? The bag? I know exactly.
Was it like a manure type smell?
Fish, like. it's
Oh, fish and
traditional.
yeah. Hmm. Yeah, fish emulsion works pretty good. It's a good nutrient. I don't really like to use too much of it. If you run a lot of it, you can run into, some problems. Well, when, we're putting fresh, there's, there's blood and bones and, all that stuff in there. So it's not like, dessert necessarily, but, the crab, I'm not a big fan of the crab smell, you know what I mean? But yeah, it's, I don't know, it's part of the territory mixing it, but once it's done, you know what I mean? You're definitely not going to have any bad smells or anything like that. But yeah, it's not going to be for everybody. I promise you that. It's not going to be for everybody for sure. But let's make some soil. But yeah, this stuff will just crush any soil that you'll buy at a bag store by a million. All right, let's do it. We'll grab some tarp.